Good morning, Senhor Ministro. Dear friends, we're welcoming today Mr. Manuel Augusto, Foreign Minister of Angola, and it is a privilege for me to introduce him. His presence here is meaningful for many reasons, because it tells us that ECFR is opening its attention and focus to Africa, and therefore looking into one of the most critical regions for Europe and the world. And also that one of the most relevant African countries finds interest in engaging with European partners to discuss common concerns. It is meaningful, especially because Angola is presently living a new political cycle under the leadership of President João Lourenço, who has signaled to his own country and to the international community his commitment to bring Angola to fulfill its potential in the role of an indispensable player for the stability and the development of the region. So we are indeed privileged to have Angola's foreign minister to share his views with us on a number of important issues regarding his own country's role in the region, his views on the European and Africa relation, and how together we can cooperate with other third players in the international system. Minister Domingos Augusto is a particular qualified person for this purpose. He is a leading politician in Angola, where he had a relevant role in the process leading to independence as a member of MPLA political party. Former journalist, he has a long career as a diplomat, having served in a number of important posts throughout Africa and African multilateral organizations. Manuel Domingos Augusto was a vice minister for the media, and prior to his present post, he was Secretary of State for International Affairs. At the United Nations Human Rights Council, very recently, last month, March session, he has stated Angola's commitment to multilateralism and to the importance of multicultural response to challenges such as climate change, migration, security, areas where partnerships with Europe should be urgently enhanced. Senhor Ministro, é privilégio tê-lo aqui conosco e deixe-me acrescentar ainda que é uma honra também que esta sua presença seja em Lisboa e na Fundação Gulbenkian, em que o acolhemos. A parceria desta instituição com o seu país é tão longa como a nossa própria fundação e tem um especial significado tê-lo aqui hoje conosco. Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Bom dia. Good morning. Excellencies, I know that there is some excellencies here. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the organization for the invitation and the opportunity to share some ideas on ways to improve the secular relationship between Europe and Africa. Secondly, I would like to express the honor and satisfaction that it is for me and my country to be present in this privileged space for formal and informal discussions with influential international policymakers and civil society to address the topic Africa and Europe in a multipolar world. Without forgetting it, we do not need to revisit in this session the past between our two continents, but rather focus on our new strategies for a partnership with mutual benefits. As we speak, there are ongoing negotiations on the future partnership agreements, namely the post-Cotonou for the African, Caribbean, Pacific countries, which we believe will shape a more balanced paradigm of cooperation. Some African countries continue to struggle with the legacy of colonialism, civil wars, terrorism, corruption, lack of infrastructure, development and the environment problems, and a host of challenges, but they also have huge potential with rich natural resources and a very young population. The emergence of new actors in the international political system is currently determining a reformulation of strategic balance in which Africa plays a relevant role. Many African states, for their part, are harnessing the benefits of this multipolar world. The continent is tapping into the changing global order, partnering with powers such as China, Japan, Turkey, India, Brazil, the Gulf states, and Russia. As mentioned yesterday during the segment European Sovereignty in a Multipolar World, the European Union is struggling for finding a common external policy, which in existence is making it to lose ground in global affairs, especially in Africa, where emerging economies and political powers are settling. Europe should not neglect its comparative advantage in knowing Africa better than any other continent, and in doing so, can contribute effectively in solving some of the main challenges Africans face. This challenge includes combating poverty and hunger, desertification and land degradation, youth unemployment, interstate or interstate conflicts, normally generating political and military instability in some regions of the continent, such as the Great Lakes region and the Sahel. Territorial disputes, conquest or control of power or access to various natural resources. The fight against terrorism and organized transnational crimes, violent extremist movements, illicit financial flows, and cybercrime. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, while relations between Europe and Africa have strategic contours for both, we are bound to recognize that the real gains between the two continents are disproportionate, with Africa continuing to be regarded as a mere supplier of raw materials and commodities for Europe's leading industry. This sad reality demands a change in behavior of the world political and social actors and decision makers so that we can build a better world for the present and benefit future generations. One of Europe's biggest challenges, in our view, whose consequences are Europe's biggest challenge, whose consequences are, among others, the impact on political landscape of many European Union states, is the illegal immigration. This change on the political landscape in many of these European countries is complicate more its external affairs and is a phenomenon of division in Europe. This issue must be dealt in a long-term perspective with actions that can help, in the particular case of the African continent, such as the implementation of the decisions of the La Valletta Migration Summit of 2015, namely the creation of better living conditions, employment, technical training, among others, for young Africans to remain in their countries. The phenomenon of migration and mobility, which is not only exclusively for Africa, can be transformed into a positive element capable of supporting socio-economic development both in the countries of origin and in the countries of destination. Europe and Africa need to find a roadmap for cooperation that will enable the sustainable economic development to be strengthened and contribute positively to a mutually advantaged partnership. Finally, I would like to stress that in the current climate of global affairs, Africa and Europe should look less into the past and focus on the future. It is irrelevant, in my view, to identify mistakes and assign responsibilities if a coherent course for the future is not established. Unlike some public statements or think tanks opinion makers that pretend to ignore it, we are among those who believe that the relations between Africa and Europe matters in the global affairs. Angola is ready to contribute to the construction of a new and revigorated alliance between Africa and Europe. I thank you.
Thank you so much for your address. The ministers will be willing to take exchanges with the audience if there are any questions or comments that might be you might be willing to make. While this happens, I would just ask the minister whether you think that on the level of the African Union and European Union there should be further interchange and cooperation. Do you think that, what steps do you think would be useful on that level to be taken regarding the challenges you've just mentioned? Is there an enhancement of cooperation that could be done in that level?
Yes, Teresa. I think that in the last few couple of years, we have been discussing with Europe a new strategy. Yesterday and today, in this room and at the gala dinner, was clear that people spoke less about Europe and the rest of the world and more on China. We talk about China all the time, for many reasons, for all the reasons, which means that the China factor is an element now incontrovertible in the international relations. Yesterday also, with a sad feeling, I could realize that the main speaker at the gala dinner, a reputed professor of political science, he spoke almost 1 hour. And in no moment he just mentioned Africa. He talked about everything. I learned a lot about strategies and ideas and future threats. He just ignored that there is a continent where, unlike he said yesterday, or pretend to pass on, including United States of America, are concerned with. United States of America, with President Trump, just approved a $60 billion plan for Africa. And the main objective, because the United States government made it clear, the main objective is to stop the China influence on Africa. That's why I say in my statement that Africa matters for global affairs. Actually, some of the strategic raw materials that both United States of America and other superpowers need, they exist in Africa only. When we talk about cobalt, coltan, all these elements fundamental for the aviation industry and the military industry, they are in Africa. And so the American administration is concerned with this, is talking to us. 2 months ago, less than 2 months, I hosted the Deputy Secretary of State of the United States, Mr. John Sullivan, in Angola. I met Mr. Cyril Sator, the National Security Advisor of President Trump in Angola. So, and with all, last week, the Undersecretary for Treasury of the United States was in Angola. So that shows that we matter. So when it comes to Europe, of course, we are saying to Europe that the world is changing, so our relations must be adapted to the new reality. I mentioned Cotonou Agreement, which is an agreement for more than 30 years, which is outdated. We are negotiating a new legal framework for the relations between Africa and Europe. So, answering your question directly, yeah, we think that it's time for us to set up a new framework for our relations. What worries us is that Europe is more and more divided, and it's difficult for us, Africa, for instance, to know with which Europe will we discuss. That Europe that say that they will close the doors to any foreigner or especially to any African, or that Europe which thinks that we can be integrated, that an investment in the Africa development will have an impact on Europe's stability. So this is the question mark now.
Thank you. In fact, yesterday we were looking at a survey whereby one of the concerns of Europeans would be on expectations on the future European Commission and governance would be to have a common policy on migration, and this is on a positive way. So I think this is one of the areas where cooperation with Africa would be absolutely paramount. And so this is exactly one of the concerns and hopefully one of the new areas of cooperation that will be positively considered in the next political cycle of Europe. And I see one arm raised there. Do go ahead. Falta microfone.
Thanks. I'm Polish. I come from Poland, from the Polish Institute of International Affairs, Patrycja Sasnal. Mr. Minister, your talk was very interesting, and I think we don't talk about Africa enough. And I also think you rightly emphasized the fact that Europe is divided and does not speak in one voice. But on the other side, Africa is so much more divided. And there is a disproportion between the strength of European integration and the fact that the African Union as an organization is certainly not as integrated and as strong. I wanted to ask you whom in Africa you think Europe should talk to predominantly. I imagine it's a difficult question to be asking a minister of Angola, but also what the role of African Union, in your opinion, is in our European-African relations.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And indeed, Africa is divided, but Africa is united in one thing. We recognize that only together we will move forward. And I think one of the main problems in bilateral relations, Europe, Africa, is the fact that from Europe, the view still being an post-colonial, if not neo-colonial view of dealing with Africa. I will give you an example. I have many friends, ministers from the European Union. When you discuss Africa, for instance, when you discuss Democratic Republic of Congo in Brussels, what do? You ask the Belgian Foreign Affairs Minister to give you the point. Why the Belgian Foreign Affairs Minister and not the Slovenia or the Bulgarian Foreign Affairs Minister? Because Belgium was the colonial power of Congo. But Belgium today, I'm talking about it, in global affairs, doesn't matter much, to say the least. So, but you still discuss Congo, one of the biggest countries in Africa, based on what the Belgian government will tell you. And the rest of the 27 ministers will rubber stamp. So this is an example, a real example. And the same, when you want to talk about Angola, you look at Augusto Santos Silva, the Portuguese minister, to tell you what's going on in Angola. This is at least a new colonial view. And while you will still on this path, will be difficult to understand and to cooperate with Africa. This is one side. But the reflect of it is also, when you talk about the vision, that we Africans, we look at us also as Francophones, Anglophones, Lusophones, and so on. So we are trying to change it. African Union, for instance, as an organization, made this structure a real copy-paste of European Union, with the commissioners, with this. We don't have that level of development. We don't have this level of financial strength to accommodate these institutions. So now, as you know, or you are following, we are going back track. We are trying to adapt. We are making change, a reform in the African Union to be more, let's say, realistic and reflect more our reality. So we recognize our mistakes, but here, for these sessions and for this talk, is to tell Europe that we, Africa, we matter for your future. And that you must, it's not, we now, when we talk among us with European partners and the other Western partners, we spend more time getting from you what we shouldn't do with China, with Turkey, with this, than what we must do with Europe. So we want us to discuss Europe-Africa relationship.
Thank you, very interesting. I listened to you when you were talking about reforms in the African Union. Maybe it's our turn to learn with what you are doing and simplifying our structures also. So we might learn something from your reform in multilateral organization. I would just to say that I don't know if there's any other. Yes, I see an arm there, but just to say that, well, you go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Fabienne Hara. I work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You mentioned in your comments that there is a negotiation going on about the post-Cotonou agreement, and that there is a hope that this will produce a more balanced partnership. Could you elaborate on this and explain what more balanced partnership would mean to you? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this process of negotiating the post-Cotonou agreement just started. Of course, I'm not part of the negotiating team, but I'm following this closely. But just to give an example, we are telling the Europeans there must be a difference between Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. We are different with different realities. The existing agreement put us on the same basket. So we are proposing to Europe or a separate agreement between Europe and Africa, which Europe doesn't agree because they think it's easier for Europe also to have one sole agreement, and then we can have different, let's say, annex. But there are already countries like mine, Angola, that from some time, although we are ACP members, but we have a separate agreement with Europe. We have a separate framework for bilateral discussion between European Union and Angola, which is called joint roadmap. So, and we meet twice a year. So, but we are telling Europe that that Cotonou agreement, that was from at least 40 years. So now there is a new reality. And I think we will end up finding some sort of agreement who can accommodate both. But we are, as I say, there are now new players in the world. Angola, my country, is an example. We had the longest civil war, one of the longest civil wars, with high level of destruction. 2002, we end up this civil war. And as any country emerging from a long civil war, we were expected some sort of donors conference for the reconstruction of the country. That was denied. We pledged, no, the international community say, no, you don't need donors conference. So we had to find our way. We turned east. And in 16 years, we were able to reconstruct our country, not at the level we would like to have, but we did with China. 16 years after, so our friends from Western Hemisphere, they come and say, oh, you have too much influence of China, it's not good cooperation, it's not that. So we say, where were you? And we can see now in Angola, some Western Europe companies in a joint venture with the Chinese company working in Angola. This is a reality. So, in our view, Europe can't sleep in the history, in the past, that we say. We must focus on the future. The world is not waiting. And we, Africa, especially in those countries where we have the resources, we have natural resources, that is the case of Angola, we can negotiate with anyone. And we will do so. So for the sake of our people's prosperity. So what we are saying is that all the agreements, multilateral agreements or not with Europe, must reflect the new reality. And I will emphasize again, break for good with this new colonial view of Africa, because the world is moving.
Minister, thank you very, very much. Your message, I'm sure, resonates in all those who are here today, and very concrete ones. And I'm sure also like to tell you that although at yesterday's dinner, Africa was not mentioned by the speaker, it was very often mentioned here during the day, and I'm sure your ambassador was taking notes. He will be able to tell you how often this word and the need for Africa, further European-Africa cooperation was mentioned here. So it's really a founding panel, this one, that brings also ECFR its wish to will decided to open one of a new Africa program. So I'm sure we'll be looking forward into the future of closer cooperation. Thank you very, very much again.
Thank you, Teresa, and just allowed me on behalf of Angola and Africa, since I think I'm the only African speaking at this session, I must thank sincerely the European Council for Foreign Relations, and looking forward to be present in events like this, because I think it's a singular opportunity for us, not just to pass on our message, but also to learn what the world thinks about us. Thank you very much.